Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Thank you for coming. This is really special, and I'm also nervous. I'll try not to be too embarrassed. I have notes, so I will be reading sometimes, mostly so I can stay on time, because we have like only a short window of time to get through my life's work. So this is like, an overview of most of my work. I'm Liz Alexander. I am the program coordinator for the sculpture department, and then I also am one of the Liz's that runs the thesis program for Senior Fine Art Studio. And so I'm typically in 301. So if you're curious about any of this and want to talk further, you can always find me over there, especially on Mondays and Wednesdays. So make sure your notes are at the beginning, Liz. So for this talk, I'm going to be focusing on what I'd like to think of as the seed pieces. So the moments in my studio practice where I can trace much of what I currently do back to. Moments of extreme growth, most of which happened when I was distracted or struggling with something else. I wasn't planning for it, but things that, looking back over about 20 years, I can kind of see like that's where things started. Nothing has changed. I am the same person that I was when I was about 4 years old, drawing rockets on the ground. I think I just got my first Atari from my uncle. I want you to empathize with this young person on the right, because I'm about to tell you a very embarrassing story about kid logic that I did. So I was raised by Nick and Sarah Alexander in Hopedale, Massachusetts. They're both makers and ran a steel fabrication shop my entire life. They were incredibly young. They were 19 and 20 when I was born. So we all grew up together. So they were not a dissimilar age to many of you in this room. And so they were figuring out how to be adults while they were also figuring out how to raise a human. Our house was this hodgepodge of what they could make, what they found on the street, hand-me-downs, and I think of it as like the sort of aesthetics of human ingenuity. Every curtain was sewn by my mom and steel furniture made in my dad's shop. And this taught me to see the possibilities in found and unwanted things, just growing up in that environment. So when my parents finally had the means to get a brand new couch in their mid to late 20s, it changed the whole house. Like, I could not understand why we couldn't eat around the couch and we couldn't color around the couch and we couldn't play near the couch. Like, all of a sudden my entire worldview was completely upended. And so I decided to cut into the couch to get to the bottom of what was going on. This isn't I don't have documentation of that, but it is, there are a lot of studies about how children learn through taking things apart. And you'll find that I'm still processing the unknown and exercising my curiosity in this way. For years, I've communicated through cutting into, editing, extracting, breaking down, and rearranging artifacts that are similar to those of my past. My interest in exploring American values and the idealism of home stem from that loving yet tumultuous working class upbringing where our home was at the center of our world. I think about how these spaces bear witness and wonder what it might look like if they embodied our emotions and the more complicated elements of ourselves. I explore ways we are shaped by our homes and the activity within them. It is a place where hidden values and power structures are taught, enacted, and reinforced, where one's security and safety can turn on a dime. Familiar domestic forms are often blended with cast dorm debris and paper flora to imbue these objects of order and comfort with the unpredictability and slow evolution of the natural world. Traditional crafts are combined with contemporary materials to create work that can range from a disassembled teacup to a photo series of alternate environments to site-specific installations with sound and performance, of which I often work with collaborators. Through purposeful acts of deconstruction and reconstruction, I call into question our personal and societal aspirations and how domestic objects become their signifiers. And a lot of my work can be, I wasn't thinking about any of this when I was a young artist and getting my BFA. And a lot of my work can be traced back to certain pivotal pieces, as I mentioned before, usually times when I thought I was messing around. And in this case, I was trying to solve a problem. I was in a monoprinting class as a senior at MassArt, and I could not connect with the processes. I loved doing monoprinting, I loved the process of it, but I didn't like what I was making with it. And we had one assignment where we were asked to make stencils, and that awoke that kind of primal love of cutting things up and cutting into things that I hadn't really been doing before this piece. And I just really enjoyed making those stencils, so I decided to cut all my prints and see what could happen if I made a sculptural work with the cut prints. And I think it's really important not to dismiss things what might come easy or bring you joy, because that is where you can start and where you're probably willing to spend time to push yourself from, because you're doing something that you just can't stop doing anyway. And so I proceeded to just cut everything in my past for years and years and years. Any material I could get my hands on, plywood, hollow core doors. And I was treating all of these materials as if they were raw materials. I wasn't really thinking a lot about collaborating with any designer or anything. I was just gathering what was free and what I could, what I could get a jigsaw through, and then proceeding from there. And in graduate school, I was immobilized for about 2 weeks with pneumonia, my second semester of graduate school, and it was, I just needed to do something to keep my hands busy and keep my mind from going nuts. And so I gave myself a very simple task. I found this book of formal gardens called Bellingrath Gardens and Home, and just said, what would happen if I cut all the flowers? This book has a lot of flowers. This will definitely keep me busy for a long time. And I loved seeing how much was altered by changing just that one element, and how the tight organization of the formal garden was disrupted. Thinking about formal gardens as grand displays of power and resources suddenly became surreal and disorderly and chaotic through this one very simple intervention. I discovered the power in absence because I gave myself permission to collaborate with the object, working within the history and identity of the object by leaving enough of it intact. And I collected all the flowers and then created this sort of abstracted landscape and this sort of concentration of color. And I made this work sick with pneumonia. I wasn't thinking about breakthroughs or concepts or anything. I was really just killing time. I was also really sick of the deterrent language I was frequently receiving about my love of decor and traditional symbols of beauty, such as flowers. So cutting all of these flowers was also kind of a quiet rebellion. While I was feeling sick, I was just oh yeah, I'm gonna just take them all out. And anyone that was at Sam Field's talk, you heard that that's a common thing, the common feedback that people got for a while. So I asked, I was better, and I was really excited by this project and excited by what I discovered through it, and thought, well, what if I do this to something in space? What if I do this to a chair? And it didn't have the same immersive qualities that I wanted, that I was finding in those collages. You could peer in and sort of get immersed in those landscapes, and in the chair, you could see everything around it, and so I felt very differently about it. And this is very embarrassing. So I made a first draft, which is this housewife, I don't even know. I don't know what I was doing here, but I think part of it is because I came up with the title first. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with Keeping Up Appearances, the BBC sitcom. But because I came up with the title first, I think I was thinking of this camp. But if you think of Keeping Up Appearances, it's really like pushing down in face of something. And I was, once I thought more deeply about it, I was thinking of what that actually really means, and how you're, hiding from what's really going on and trying to save face and stiff upper lip and all of those things. And so I've obsessively contrived this living space only to take it apart piece by piece, flower by flower, and arrange it into a new. And I consider this to be an unsettled space disrupted by this manic need to keep busy and maintain control in the face of uncertainty. And I made this series at a time of forward looking. I was pursuing my MFA, but it was during the Great Recession. And so I feel like I wasn't thinking about this at the time, but I feel like this was actually a snapshot of that moment in American history and in my place in American history, trying to work towards my future and feeling like there wasn't one. And in this, I made this triptych, and I always think about the fourth slide that doesn't exist as the most important. Will I keep repairing the space, or will it be the snake eating its tail of me, just like taking it apart and changing it, and taking it apart and changing it over and over and over again? I revisited this series several times and rearranged it and worked in just using wallpaper. And this series, and none of this would have happened if I didn't have pneumonia and I didn't cut flowers out of that book. And so I want to emphasize that. And there's a couple more series that I can just trace all the way back to that moment. In keeping up appearances, I was cutting every single thing up in the room, not just the soft materials, but I was cutting hard materials as well, and using my training in glass working to understand how the material can be deconstructed. And I just loved how what these singular objects contained. And so I was appropriating these once coveted domestic objects, these symbols of beautification and success, and I consider the value that we place on objects. And now these once coveted symbols of success occupy large areas in secondhand stores. I'm always getting these things for free or finding them really cheap. But when removing the florals from the surface, I'm additionally removing any signifiers of value from the object, in addition to rendering the object useless. So any connoisseur of porcelainware knows, a lot of people understand how valuable that china pattern is, or what house it came from, or who designed it by the pattern. And so by removing it, I'm neutralizing that quality of it. Frivolity is used to diminish the feminine and the domestic, of which porcelainware and floral decor are almost cliche. And yet these same items are so often used to measure the homemaker and communicate the values of the household. And so, in kind of harnessing the ways that that decorative is used as a sort of word to push down or to diminish certain things, I'm using that as a way to kind of fight back against those exact qualities and biases. And how I cut the porcelain is I work underwater with a pneumatic tool, and I just adapted a way that I learned how to etch glass. And if anyone's curious, I'm happy to go more in depth about that. It sounds terrible, and it's incredibly aggressive, and I can only do it for about an hour or two at a time. So in 2015, I moved to Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and this is an image of a Confederate statue that was still in the town square right outside of the courthouse when I moved there. It came down when I was living there during the sort of movement of civil rights activism that was happening. And I was processing this culture shock that I expected to experience moving to the South, but I kind of experienced during, in the entire country during the 2016 campaign and election. And I wanted to make work about this, but I also was very wary about forcing myself into a conversation that was being had by many artists of color for a long time before I was even really concerning myself with it. And I came across, just by happenstance, I came across this entire set of Confederate commemorative plates in just a junk shop in North Carolina, in Winston-Salem. And was just like, oh my God, I've been cutting porcelain for a decade. I can do something with this. And this is within my wheelhouse. And so it's within my language. And so I'm not just like taking somebody else's language from them to make this work. And so I proceeded to grind into and remove all the symbols of the Confederacy from these objects, and including their packaging and everything else. But instead of removing the thing completely, I ground it down to dust. And so so this is a sort of container of the dust underneath each plate. And that took ages. That takes ages to do. And so these plates were printed in 1971, long after the Civil War, and made as these kind of like docile items for people to hang in their homes, passed down to future generations, and they're sort of made to be these precious heirlooms through this 21 karat gold edging and this archival packaging and information cards, et cetera. I intentionally kind of left the American landscape between the voids and only removed the Confederate symbols. And through grinding it down, through kind of keeping all of the dust and text from each removal, it kind of was to demonstrate that whether or not there's symbols or totems to these events, like they still happened. The dust is still around us. It still makes up the American landscape. And I found out that I actually should have been making this work, because through researching this project, I learned that I had ancestors that fought and died on the Confederate side at Pickett's Charge. And this was the family that were civil rights activists, and they never talked about this. And this was just not even like considered an important part of the family history. And so I felt like it just changed how I felt about this entire series, and it sort of made me just want to buy every single Confederate plate that I could find. And I think I've cut probably about 35 in total across several series. It's a surprising amount that exist in the world. And these were made in the 1990s, and I do not title all of these myself. A Mightier Work is Ahead is my title, but all the other titles are what the plates had written on the back, which were titles from paintings that an artist, Mort Kunstler, painted, that each sort of scene was extracted from to make these transferware plates. And I titled this series, A Mightier Work is Ahead, paraphrased from a Frederick Douglass quote, where he said, "But a mightier work than the abolition of slavery now looms up before the abolitionist. When we have taken the chains off of the slave, as I believe we shall do, we shall find a harder resistance to the second purpose of this great association than we have found even upon slavery itself." So we're like obviously still very much living in this moment that was predicted over 100 years ago. 150, I don't know, I can't do the math, but long enough ago, too long ago. Another thing of living in North Carolina, which is kind of ironic to say right now, because I don't really think of Massachusetts having the extreme weather that the South has, but we're living with all these fires all around us. And this was, I was teaching at Aramont School of Crafts, and it's in the Smoky Mountains, and I was there a year after the fires, and there was still charcoal everywhere and all of this debris. And we were also, there was like constant storms and floods and storm debris everywhere, and the way that everyone in my city dealt with brush was that they would just pile it outside their house. So I was just like always just dragging storm debris back to my studio. And I'd usually have to give a stick to my dog while I was carrying something so that she wouldn't take what I was carrying. And I made this work. And so when I talk about casting it, I'm talking about making a paper replica of the actual object. And so it weighs nothing, and I can attach all sorts of things together. I started doing this because I admired another artist who was doing it, but also wanted to ship things more cheaply. And then just again, like it woke something inside me that I just couldn't stop doing. And created this piece, All Things Bright and Beautiful. And so this is what those two images were actually two parts of a hole that were on either side of a wall. And so as you walk around the piece, you're passing this kind of glittery, very luscious, I don't know, just like lovely floral, massive like floral glut. And then you come to this other side and it's like charred and it looks like it's been through a flood. And if you look closely, there's a sort of X in the center, and you can see light coming through the other side. And so what I wanted to emphasize was that both sides of this wall are made out of the exact same stuff, but one is glossed over with this distraction. And you know, I mean, this can be applied to the climate crisis. It can also be applied to any number of other things where there's just like one side that benefits from glossing things over and distracting from. And there was actually a couple of poets that read a piece on either side of that wall that wrote a piece in response, and it was about abuse in the home. And so it was an incredible interpretation and not guided by my hand or anything, but it was really moving. And so even though like as artists we have reasons for making a work, it's very, you know, the work is about conflict and the work is about veneer, and there's a lot that kind of goes along with that. I don't throw anything away, so this piece is made out of this is called All Things Remaining, and it's made out of all the sort of negative space between the elements of the wallpaper that coated that one side. So I was cutting out wallpaper flowers. I took every flower out of the wallpaper, and this is just the negative space between those. And this is a very large, this is a 20-foot long collage. And I didn't think about it at the time, but I kind of recreated Gordon Matta Clark's Bingo, which is one of like a piece that I really love. It's like the same colors and everything. It's wild. You know, and I was thinking about sort of like the facade of a house that maybe was just sheared, or like I love when you look at the side of a building and you can tell that something's been taken down and you can see the stairs. So, you know, I think we were just on the same plane at that point. And I'm going to finish with this installation. So all of these epic storms that were happening in North Carolina, I had this neighbor that had this grove of cedar trees that were covered with ivy and like all dying every single time. And I loved those cedar trees because owls were always in there. But every time there was a storm, one of those trees fell on our power, at least one. You could see many. And I think he was just like using the power company to remove his dead trees for him. And so it cost us power every single time there was a storm because it was the direct line to our house. So one of my neighbors was very kind, and I don't know why she did this, but she cleaned up one of the limbs and cut all the branches. I think she just wanted the branches, but not the limb. And so there was this 13-foot long tree limb from these cedar trees, and I dragged it back to my studio because it was very close to my house, and just stored it under our deck for probably about 3 months. Or no, sorry, 3 years. It was there for a long time. Because where am I going to work in be able to show in a space big enough to showcase a 13-foot paper tree limb? And I eventually did actually get the opportunity to install. I was commissioned to install at the North Carolina Museum of Art, and the wall was 26 feet long. So I had plenty of room to finally realize my dream of casting this tree that cost me so much frustration. And this was the first project I was able to work with a part-time assistant. This is Tatum, who is amazing and made this whole thing, helped me make this whole thing happen. And what we did was we made paper and then coated the whole tree with handmade paper made out of cotton fibers that were like recycled sheets that I just didn't, they were like too gross to use anymore, so they were like full of holes. This So we broke down the sheets and made paper with the sheets, and then also combined that with abaca fibers for extra strength and dyed them black so that it looked charred like there was a fire. We coat it with many layers. This is called laminate casting, which is like hundreds-year-old method of making paper replicas, and it's the origins that I found out are in South Korea, but this is something, you know, like I think anything involving paper, it's been around for so long. Humans have been able to do such amazing things with it all over the globe. And I came to it because I really admired Leonardo Drew's work and wanted to try it out, and then just like kept searching and learning and developing my own method. So this is me, this is time lapse, skinning the tree. So I'm taking the paper shell off of that tree, and I had to figure out how to do it in 2 parts so that I could actually put it back together without losing 20 years of my life to doing that. So, and yay, I managed to do it. And so then I have the 2 halves, and I have to like incrementally put them back together to create these hollow objects similar to the one on the table. And they weigh, like this 13-foot tree limb, and it weighed maybe 5 pounds, maybe 10 pounds. It weighs nothing. It's very lightweight, probably 10 pounds. And I used like mini clamps and lots of blue tape and lots of glue. I come up with a lot of my ideas when I'm stuck with my work on my walks. So I take a lot of photos on walks, and this tree limb just like looked kind of wimpy when I actually put it up. This like thing that was so epic in my mind just didn't, it needed more things. And so I put a cast of my studio chair, and then I noticed all this wisteria vine on the power lines, which is also all over the neighborhood in North Carolina, and added, you know, ropes and things for this wisteria line. And so I kind of had the tree, you'll see a video where you can tell that there is dimension to this, but I had the tree kind of resting on like power lines in the space. And I also, for this project, was able to, like I finally had the resources to realize another wild dream that I had, where I really wanted to design my own wallpaper that was dying. I wanted to make a floral damask that died, you know, across the wall in some capacity. And so this is the wallpaper was made out of gouache paintings that I just painted of flowers in my garden, as well as a repeat of an indigo bunting, which was a bird that was on the grounds of the North Carolina Museum. And just like painted them as they were dying and made digital collages of all of my paintings. And I had to like get over a lot of internalized feelings about how painting flowers wasn't very serious, because, I don't know, I mean, like there's also like just rules and biases that you hang on to, and it doesn't matter to anyone, but you just like realize that you're kind of getting in your own way a lot. And it's really exciting when you're like catch yourself breaking your own rules sometimes. And so this piece spanned this 26-foot wall, and it's all this paper debris kind of like crashing through a wall. I call this series of work Beautiful Disasters because it's like kind of lovely and placed, and it's not really like that disastrous, but I titled this work, "And You Didn't Even Know Enough to Be Sorry," after a Mary Oliver poem from the Book of Time. The poem is called From the Book of Time. Regarding our fleeting sense of safety and loss within these very much like unprecedented times that we're living in, the scene of floral damask wallpaper and paper furniture are made to be a tragic spectacle through cast storm debris and deliberate deconstruction. When I was thinking about the sense of security that is associated with home, we are far too often reminded of how delicate and fragile these structures can be. And yet, we are slow to admit the frequency that the exterior world infiltrates our interior spaces. And then the last thing I'm going to end with, and I won't talk through this, is a performance. So I had So I actually got a budget for this work, so I was able to pay people to do things to make the work more awesome. And so I collaborated before with this, this dance performer, Blakeney Bullock, and said, invite somebody that you're comfortable collaborating with. This is what I'm thinking about the work. Come up, do what you can do. And I intended for this to be kind of an ambient dance, like that was my proposal during the opening reception. It was a sort of like grand reopening of the North Carolina Museum because they rehung their collection. And so I expected them to just sort of dance and people would walk around, and everybody just stayed and sat and watched the whole thing. They danced for 90 straight minutes. I told them, I was like, you can go, there's a way that you can leave and come back and take bathroom breaks and like get some air. And they wanted to do the full 90-minute block of time that we had. And I didn't know before I invited them to do this performance that Blakeney was in Puerto Rico during Hurricane Maria. And so I was like, well, you don't have to do this if this is like, unearthing major trauma for you. And she said, no, actually, I think this is good. And her and Miles came up with this dual personality, the sort of like ways that she sees people respond to catastrophic events. So she was kind of like frozen and unable to almost moved really slowly and had like stifled movements. And Miles was really frantic, and it was like almost like mutual aid reactions and FEMA and just this like manic response to a natural or just any kind of catastrophe. And then my partner is a sound artist, and so they created a sound piece that also I gave the prompt, this is what I'm doing, and create a thing that sort of is like you're in a storm. And the speaker is in this little chandelier ball and chain that Blakeney was carrying around. It was just like a little Wonder Boom speaker that I built the thing around, and so she dragged it around for the performance. That's all I got. Thank you. So I have some props. So I actually have one of my Bellingrath Gardens and Home collages from 2008. And so just to kind of give you a sense of how small these things are, it's weird when you project something that's 2 inches on a screen. And then if anyone wants to pick this up and see how not heavy it is, it's kind of, I didn't talk about this, but I had a fire marshal almost shut one of my shows down because he thought I was hovering a cinder block over people's heads, and it turned out it was a paper cinder block on a paper branch, and I was like, and then they were too embarrassed to tell me, and I was like, that is the best feedback I could have gotten. And then I also have a couple of porcelain pieces handled with care, but they're actually sturdier than you think. I deliberately brought like kind of the junkier porcelain, which is full of more filler and a little sturdier than bone china that's often really delicate. And so this one has some things, I don't know if I'm not done with it or if I deliberately left things. So this was like my work in progress shelf in my stairwell in my studio. But if anyone has any questions, wants to come and check out my props, I'm around. But I'm also available. I think we have a few more minutes to answer questions if anyone's got any. Yeah.
So you returned to Massachusetts
Mm-hmm.
from a whole bunch of work that was based in being in North Carolina for a few years. How's that changing things now?
I don't know if I can know yet, because I didn't realize how much North Carolina impacted my work until I was there for a little while. I will say moving disrupts productivity and lives and everything. And so I'm kind of just coming out of that. One thing that happened was moving back here, I'm now a half an hour away from a foundry run by someone that I went to undergraduate school with. And so they're helping me cast my paper. And it was because of the grant that I got last year. So they're helping me cast some of my paper in bronze, which is really exciting. And I'm working on a series called Hell's Bells, which is my grandmother's favorite swear. She says, Hell's Bells and Buckets of Blood. My like very sweet British grandmother has the most metal swear. And I'm kind of like in this starts and collecting stage of some pretty, I'm like starting to see the plant life come into it. Like I'm making a big Queen Anne's lace, and like things that I sort of find around this area are coming into the work. But only time will tell what the return home will do to reform my studio. Any other questions? Yeah?
Did that piece, where does it live now, and did it show elsewhere? Are you planning to
Well, so the wallpaper was made and like wallpaper to that wall. I was able to collect it and save it, and I've shown fragments. Like I just actually picked up, there was a Mass Art alumni show where I had a fragment of it. It's difficult to find large spaces. Like when you do a commission for a space, it's really hard to find that's a similar space. So I'll probably process that down into a different piece and with the fragments of the wallpaper that I had, and maybe do something somewhat similar somewhere else. It was up at the North Carolina Museum for a little over a year. I drove down there last December to pick it up. The entire thing fit in my RAV4. I have like dreams of where it could go, but I don't know where it'll go next. But that was my first real opportunity with resources. And it was interesting to see. I don't know, I have a really hard time asking for help, especially help for free. So it was like, oh, I can pay people now. So then I don't have to ask for help for free. Because I have a really hard time, especially being a mid-career artist, asking people to do things for free now. It's different when you're young. And so that opened a whole world for me. I will say, when you have an employee though, it's like having a boss, because you have to stay on top of your stuff in order for them to have something to do, which I did not expect. I was like, oh, like Tam it's coming tomorrow, and like I need this to be done so they have something to work on. So that was a learning curve for me. But yeah, even actually there's several pieces that I showed that had one version, and then that was site specific, and then I changed it and glued it down to boards or something. And so All Things Bright and Beautiful was actually a different piece before. And then I was in a show and just like coyly asked, can I have this on two sides of a wall, and could you cut a hole in the wall for me? And they did let me do it. So, you know, there's also just like, sometimes the work just happens because somebody allows me to do my crazy ideas, but like I couldn't just do that in a studio, really. I need those big spaces, so. Is it pizza time?
Yes. Well, it can be.
All right, maybe one more question, then the pizza party can start.
I want to ask a little bit more about sound in your process.
Oh, sure.
Just because, I mean, we got to finish on something where we actually got to experience the sound and think about it in your work in terms of like a more immersive installation. I was just curious if sound plays a part in your process when you're working, when you're thinking, or if it's always something that's coming at the end of a process for you.
I think because I married a sound person, like I know the feeling I want if I want to have sound, but I can't do the sound part. I don't think like he does. But there will be times where I'm being recorded while I'm working in the studio, and then that's brought into the piece. And there was that slide in the beginning sorry, it's like dizzying. Oh my God, so much stuff. Where is it? There it is. So this is Todd, like several years, it was like almost a decade ago, playing the piano harp that I then cast. And so there was a recording of this piano harp, like as they were cutting strings, Todd was playing it. So it was like, I don't know, like while you were looking at this casting, you were kind of hearing the thing being taken apart. So sometimes it's folded in, and sometimes it's, somebody's gonna let me put sound in this, can we add sound? Because it's difficult to always have sound in a work, especially if you're in a space with other artists, and headphones don't always, they don't always work for me, and QR codes are sometimes used, so I'm still kind of figuring out how that works. Having the happenings has been probably the most successful way that we've had sound incorporated into the work. And sometimes Todd and I will just be working on, I'll be making the work and Todd will be making the sound kind of in tandem in different parts of the house. So yeah, it's really special to be able to see your work or hear your work through other people's version of it. I don't know. Because storm means something to me, but it might mean something different to somebody else. And so when I talk about what I'm making the work about, they're bringing their own thing to it. And I think that's what makes it so exciting. But yeah, so I'm around if anyone wants to keep talking, although we'll probably move into the library if anyone wants to keep talking, because there's a class in here. pizza party in the hall. Thank you so much, everyone. It was really great.